hear me, friend? On the block, we began. Take it to all the world with internet.
All right, peace, family. You boy FONZi Neutron representing for the DOATBM. This week, we got another diaspora conversation. We're joined with one of the brothers from the Moorish Science Temple of America, who's going to be chiming in, giving us a bit of insight, edifying us on the works of the msta. So what's good with you, bro?
Hey, man, Islam, man. Peace to you, brother. Assalamu alaikum, Hotep, whatever we want to say. Peace unto you.
Peace and blessings, man. I know at the minute we've just seen the end of a big Islamic holiday with Ramadan and Eid, so I don't know if that's something you celebrate, but if so, then hope you had a blessed one.
Yeah, man. Eid Mubarak, yeah.
My brother. So, let's kind of get straight into it because we've spoken a bit off the record, and obviously I was mentioning that in the UK there isn't a Moorish science kind of movement as we see like with some of the brothers in the States. So I wanted to fire off a few questions about a bit of time looking at your interpretation of Islam and how does the Moorish Science Temple interpret Islam, and what's the key differences between your interpretation and Orthodox Islam?
Okay. First off, I would like to say we have to define the word Orthodox. And, I know to a lot of people, that kind of means the original way or the straight way, but really that just means a uniform way. So when we kind of talk about the uniformed way, have you ever heard of the divine constitution and bylaws? The very first act says something to the degree that the Sheikh and the chairman are empowered to create law and enforce laws. Also, it says within the Quran that we are to create our own customs. So even though we're not uniform, that doesn't mean that we're not Islam. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't mean that we're not, going by the Quran. It doesn't mean that people don't people have kind of made it that way, but there's never really been a disconnect. And I think this is one of the biggest issues that we have, within the whole diaspora, for real. We perceive a disconnect that really was never there. You know what I mean? We can't expect cultures to be the exact same all over the world. Now, this isn't me coming at any particular person who may watch this and they practice Sunnah or they practice Shia. I'm not saying that their way is wrong. I'm only saying that they have cultural outlooks the same way we have cultural outlooks. We can't say that their cultural outlooks are more important than ours just because they're different or just because they're older or just because they have older records of it. Because the thing about it is, a lot of individuals don't necessarily read the Quran with interpretation. The Quran makes several references to America. You know what I mean? Over here amongst the Aboriginals, there was actually a religion that was based around the way that corn and squash grew together, and there's another one, and it was like a trinity. But basically there was a religion around it. And the Quran actually speaks about corn, and it speaks about it in a spiritual way. So it's like the Quran even says something to the far west. And the thing about it is, it also talks about a person called the Horned One, you know what I mean, in the Quran. And that was actually talking about some of the first Greeks and Romans who came over here to America. So it's like there never really was a disconnection between the two cultures. We've perceived it. We've perceived differences like that. But when we look at the original Ummah, they didn't all practice like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They try to create that image, but that's not what really happened. The thing about it is there were people who were still animists. You know what I mean? There were people who were still of the Jewish religion. There were people who were still of the Christian ideology. They were called the answers, the helpers. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we have to understand that not everybody from the very inception of the faith practiced it the same way. And, the Prophet, in many ways, he brought us Sufism. Now, I know this is contested within the Moorish Science Temple. You know, some brothers say that we're not Sufis. You know, some people say that we're a sect of our own. Some people say that we're a descendant of more Boutism, if anybody's heard things like that. And basically, they will come to the degrees and the ideology that we're something completely separate from the three known sects. And that's simply not true. When you look at Sufism, it was predominantly practiced the way that Moorish science is practiced today. You know, we have zikrs that we practice. We call them the 101s. We have our own Quran. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that it's separate. It just means that we realize that cultural implications are meant to be intertwined within the faith. I mean, the Quran says that we have made you from two different people into many different tribes and nations that you may know each other. So you really can't tell me, or you really can't speak on the fact or the concept that that basically that we're different because we practice different, or that we're alien, or that our stuff is false or it's contradictory. You know, I mean, there are definitely political differences between the two groups. It's the same way with and I'm not going to pretend that I've been there. You know, I haven't been to these places, but I have studied them. And I do know that if you are amongst the faith, you know that Sunnis and Shias don't get along. You know what I'm saying? You know, the Pakistanis
That's right.
and Afghanistan don't get along. You know what I mean? And you know that they have different tribes and cultures around them. You know, and essentially it's all the same thing. Malaysians, you know what I mean? Sometimes they don't get along with the Orthodox Muslims. You know what I mean? You talk about the Uyghurs in China. Like, the thing about it is each and every people have their own divine and fig tree, but us. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has their own faith and their own ideology, but us. And that's not unity. You know what I'm saying? Uniformity does not always equal unity. Sometimes it means the exact opposite. And I think that's what we have to understand as a people. You know, I mean, I don't see, once again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with practicing Christianity, or if you're practicing Buddhism, or if whatever you're doing. But at the end of the day, when we understand the science behind it, it's all the same. And of course, it's going to take the shape of the culture that it's incepted in. We should expect that. We can't expect to be somebody that we're not. We can't expect to be people from Iraq and all that just because we practice this, which was really widespread. You know what I mean? It was really widespread. And even people from Arabia will tell you that. They'll tell you that, you know, the vast majority of the Ummah, the vast majority of Muslims are not Arabic. You know what I mean? They have their cultural customs, you know what I'm saying? And they're probably the most widely known. They're probably the most widely accepted. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're the only ones that exist. And we have to acknowledge the teachers that came to us. We have to acknowledge the people that came to us. Because when we don't, I think we find that our faith and our love become directed to another people. And that's not good for either side. Just to be real, just to be honest with you. That's not good for either side. We can't be like, well, I'm only going to believe it if it's written in Arabic and you've spoken English your whole life. That's not a good way to be connected with your religion. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, you know, even off top, you make some good points there, and quite a few that we could dive into, but I want to sort of scratch the surface, which I suppose it could be a wider topic in its own aspect, but you did mention the Quran and stuff also. So you said you guys have your own Quran. Is that different to the other Quran? If so, how does it differ? And because oftentimes we hear a lot of Muslims that will say, you know, Quran can only be one way. Yeah, it's only the Quran that was revealed in Arabic, and if there's any, it cannot be changed. And so is this a different Quran, the Circle 7 Quran? And I've always seen it, I'm gonna keep it real. I've never like had my hands on a copy of it or anything like that. So does it differ in any kind of way, and if so, how?
Okay, so first off, I want to kind of break down the meaning of Quran. I'm not gonna do a whole lot of etymology.
Yeah.
But I want to break down the meaning of the Quran. So Quran means read, recite, and proclaim. When you talk about the revelations that were recorded during the life of the Prophet Muhammad, you have two basic main bodies, and that would be the Quran and the Hadiths. You know what I mean? Now, the thing about it is, both the Quran and the Hadiths were written by other people. But why one was the revelations recorded by his followers, you know what I'm saying? The Hadiths are basically more like people, general news of the area, general ideologies, right? Different myths, all this other type of stuff, mythology. And when you talk about the Orthodox Muslims, they have sort of weaved, let me say, they have sort of weaved that into Islamic philosophy. But we have to understand that those things were not implemented during the Prophet's lifetime. You know what I'm saying? So when we think about the concept of our Prophet, we have to realize that the Hadiths basically being the secondary, once again, mythology and stories floating around that were recorded, gossip. And that's literally what the word Hadith means in Arabic. It means talk. You know what I mean? So when we talk about the Quran, those are the divine revelations. Now, it's kind of known among scholarship that the Hadiths are a secondary text because they contain stories that just essentially weren't true. That's why these Hadiths are usually rated.
And a lot of debates, they go backwards and forwards, and some say they corrupt, some are corrupted, some aren't, and you know, all that debate around them.
Right. So when we talk about our Quran, it actually, as recorded from the Prophet Isa or Prophet Jesus, as you know, he's known in the English language, and it records the 18 missing years of his life. Now, the reason why we read those recollections instead of reading the typical Quran, because this is the uniting of the Quran of Mecca. That's one thing that people have to understand when they see the Circle 7. It says that in chapter 47. It says, you know, this is the uniting. So it's basically to understand that it's built around the same philosophy. But while the Quran speaks sort of a historical account about the Torah and the Zubar, which you know, it's that, you know, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and the Psalms. And it's sort of a reinterpretation of that along with, you know, other oral tradition that was around the area at that time. And it basically gives you the meaning and the significance of it. Now, the Circle 7 is what gives you meaning and significance to the process of initiation. And we needed that within our own clan because we had been left out of the branch of humanity. Now, I know a lot of people like to argue this, you know, especially around the term Black. But when we look at it, there is no Black nation. There is no Black land. There is no Black flag. And I'm not coming down on people connected with that. I'm only saying that this was not a designation until the 17th century. You know, it didn't really even get put in law until the Virginia Racial Integrity Act, and that was like 1924 or something. We have to understand that these brands are relatively new when we look within the scope of human history. So what will we recognize before that? What will we recognize? We were recognized by our tribe. We were recognized, more importantly, by our nation. You know what I mean? So the thing about it is we have to have that nationality. Within the Quran of Mecca, it says something to the degree that Allah has created everything within nations. So we can't think that we are a branch of humanity that was somehow left out of history or too primitive to contribute anything to world significance. That's simply false. It's simply false. And the thing about it is, even though Muslims from the East will come and teach you about um their Islam, they'll teach you about their traditions, and then they'll teach that as the authentic Islam. But we had our own traditions long before. And they were known and they were respected by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, even though people don't like to speak on that. They'll say that, oh, that's interpretation is crazy. But when we talk about our Quran, or the Circle Seven, it was basically the knowledge of the Muslims of India, which the thing about it is we can't necessarily think that the Quran was some type of isolated event in history. You know, there were many stories that were passing around about Jesus and Abraham. You know, I've read Jewish mysticism. There were tons of them. But, you know, they
Gnostics, sorry to go on, they got a whole bunch as well. Yeah. Like the Rosicrucian mysteries and the Gnostics and stuff as well. Yeah. They got like some advanced stories on Jesus that you won't find in the Bible. Some people will discredit them, but yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And some people, you know what I'm saying? And some people will discredit them because they don't fit in their political philosophy, and that's fine. But all I'm saying is we can't think that these stories were nothing new. So this is a scope of some of those stories that we didn't get. Now, I know a lot of people will say they were plagiarized of the Aquarian Gospel. I've read the Aquarian Gospel, and I can say there's many key differences, one of which the Aquarian Gospel goes out of its way to make the devil look like it comes from the outside, to basically create a spook devil, instead of realizing that the devil that you have to overcome is the carnal desires of the flesh. You know what I mean? And we do this through spiritual and aesthetic practices. And that's what our Circle 7 was come to teach us, because we had lost what we had created. We had lost the spiritual aspects, you know what I'm saying? The connection with nature, you know what I mean? The understanding of the ancient philosophies, the studying of it, the embracing of our ancestors, instead of shunning them for pseudo ancestors and Bible characters who really had nothing to do with us. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with reading about them. There's nothing wrong with practicing the faith. But when did the line get crossed that we no longer started learning about our ancestors?
Well, I think, cultural identity is definitely important. And, when we look at certain groups, and the Moorish Science Temple included, they incorporate a lot of cultural identity and heritage and stuff, just looking at Black ancestry or Moorish ancestry. I want to ask, I know we're kind of, not running for time, but if you could kind of give us a shorthand on who's considered a prophet or central figure in the Moorish Science Temple, would that be Noble Drew Ali? And if so, how is he revered or respected within the community?
So within the 101s, and I don't want to go off into a long speech because I know, like you said,
I know it can be quite expansive.
Yeah. But I wanted to be clear and precise. I would say with Prophet Noble Drew Ali, he is definitely the central character and the authority. You see, we are to imitate the Prophet. Within the Quran of Mecca, it says something to the degree that we have only sent you the prophets and sages that they may give you a frame of mind. When we talk about the Circle 7, it says the master leaves his pathway clearly cut so that you can understand exactly what moves to take. So the prophet was meant to give us an image of what we were, and I don't want to say supposed to be, but I wanted to say he represented an understanding that we needed to cope in the world that we existed. So he went and he brought back, our nationality. Now, I understand where many people talk about their origins, and, they talk about the tribes, and we talk about slavery, and even when we talk about the indigenous history. But one of the reasons that it's important that we have a nationality, because this reinforces us back. Now, there's a lot of people who get confused about, okay, well, are you saying that we're Moroccan citizens? Are you saying we're this Moroccan or this other type of stuff? The Moroccans was a general term for the people who traveled back and forth and traded with America. And one of the reasons that was the case is because it was the storehouse. Actually, when you talk about Moorish philosophy, it'll have the word Mexam, and a Mexam comes from Moroccan Arabic, which means El Makan. These were the treasuries were, at that particular point in time, who financed the trips back and forth, who made the trades, who coordinated all this other type of stuff. And this was the original UCC code that we were a part of, and it was Islamic. So this is the reason that it's important for us to understand this science. You know what I mean? When we talk about Prophet Noble Jew Ali, he's the central character because he's the one who brought us back this information. It wasn't no grateful public. It wasn't a whole bunch of people who were happy that Prophet Noble Jew Ali was teaching nationality. You know what I mean? It wasn't something that he necessarily got a parade for, even though he did have many parades. Once again, peace and blessings be upon him. But it's just like the thing about it is, as an individual, and let me not say as an individual, but as a group, we needed a prophet who spoke our language so we could truly understand these truths. I've seen plenty of brothers go to the masjid and, they still use names that allude to slavery, even though I'm not saying nothing's wrong with that. They know more about Arabic history and culture than they do their own. You know what I mean? They can remember multiple surahs, but, they don't necessarily have the historical knowledge of how we ended up in the conditions that we're in, because they believe that basically we came from a slave trade. You know what I mean? But that's simply not true. A lot of the land that we owned, there were people who looked like us who were even included in the Dawes rolls. You know what I mean? And they were awarded land because they were native, and this is actually where the popular word that a lot of people will say, 40 acres and a mule. And they'll say that somebody, promised all black people 40 acres and a mule. But see, they don't understand that the black people weren't former slaves. They were us. You know what I mean? They were speaking about, They were speaking about the indigenous. They weren't talking about necessarily just slaves. You know what I'm saying? Now, the thing about it is, I understand, I've studied the history, I understand Native Americans were thought to have slaves. But what a lot of people don't necessarily understand is that quote unquote African Americans or people from Africa also own slaves over here. There was a famous one, and I can't necessarily remember his name, but he came over here as a slave and he ended up buying his own freedom and he started purchasing slaves for himself. So it's like we've kind of given this polarized racial narrative as Europeans have always been on top, even though they know there was a Barbary slave trade on these shores. We sort of have to understand that.
Yeah.
We sort of have to understand that.
I mean, if people look at Slav, and you could go into just the different kind of slaves that were held in different periods of time. There's quite a lot of points, but I know we're trying to keep things quite concise on this one. We definitely appreciate you extending your time. When we look at things from the aspect of the community, there's often a lot of comparisons made with the Nation of Islam. Some even say that the Prophet Noble Jew Ali actually taught while his father Muhammad, and taught him about Islam and stuff. So some say they probably cross-pollinated. I was going to ask, does the Moorish Science Temple of America, as you know, have that kind of affiliation with the Nation of Islam or 5%? Is there any kind of overlap or similarity in beliefs and practices?
So I definitely agree with the ideology that Elijah Poole Bey, and I believe 4D, he was also a Bey. Were both actually adapt students of the Prophet Noah. And they ended up splitting off and making their own little organization in Detroit, in that part of the United States. And the thing about it is, I'm not saying that I don't listen to those brothers, what they teach. They definitely come with some science. They're a product of the temple, but it doesn't really mean that they carry the same message. They really come more from the racialized idea, even though when you read A Message to a Black Man, Elijah Muhammad actually tells you straight off the bat that the African is our Black brother. He's not necessarily our ancestor. They speak of the tribe of Shabazz. And, they made their hair extra curly, because of the curse and everything. Yeah, so the thing about it is, I feel like a lot of what they teach is innovation. The Prophet Noah Ali didn't really come with any alternate, necessarily origin story for these mythical concepts of race, because racism is not a scientific concept, no matter what people say. It's not a biological concept, and it's not really a social concept. It's very, very recent. It's very, very new. I think it's in a lot of places confusion.
Would you
because
say,
people haven't really.
Sorry to interject. I was, because you named the fiance. Would you say it's a spiritual concept or no? No.
I would say race is a social construct, and it's meant to separate the people according to color, but you can't put people in a coloring box. We are one human family. So the thing about it is, a person can look more paler than me, and they can still be closer related than somebody who's dark to me. This is simply because of our genetics. We're a product of the matrix. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to get too far off, but it's just basically an understanding that we connect on being like-minded as a people, not necessarily off, genetic relations like they try to force it to us. Now, I'm not saying that we're not supposed to look out for our immediate families, but what I am saying that when you read in the Quran, it says you are a descendant of Abraham because you carry on his purpose. And this is one of the reasons that we are descendants of the Moors today, because we carry on their lineage. We carry on their bloodline. You know what I'm saying? Each one of them are part of us. And technically, it applies to the whole human race. Now, that's the difference between Elijah Muhammad. Now, he tried to say that there were Black people and there were white people, and that they were essentially different, and that, Europeans were grafted on to the human race through eugenics projects. And, he said a bunch of stuff. And I'm not necessarily going to say it's incorrect. Like I said, I studied, I read A Message to a Black Man. I don't disrespect what he's saying, but I do realize there's an element of conjecture there, because essentially the concept of race is conjecture. You know what I mean? And once again, I'm not getting on anybody's beliefs. I'm just saying, according to science, we are one human family. And I think we can be comfortably subdivided into two groups, Asiatics and Muslims. And so if we understand that those degrees, we realize that it's not a Negro problem. It's not a racial problem that we suffer today. It's an ethical issue, because we've made the monetary system, our ethics, and we've forgotten the ways of the ancestors. And Islam really brought me to that revelation. And I don't really feel like Christianity ever will, because they don't really address us. They address Paul and Peter and, you know, people who live in the Middle East. You know, they don't really address what happened to us over here in America. I mean, we have to think the United States paid reparations to the Jews, and they haven't paid reparations. So for what another European did to another European, essentially, you know, they pay reparations for that, but they don't pay reparations to the atrocities that you committed against our people, the land that you've taken, the labor that you've used. You know what I'm saying? The ideas, like, and this is one thing that I think it's so important that we remember the ancestors here in the United States, is that we have to remember that our intellectual property is beneficial too. You know what I'm saying? What we think is important too, because we lose that a lot of times. And I'll say this,
Oh yeah, no, I was just agreeing.
Yeah. In the spiritual, and I'll say this, in the spiritual community, period. You know, we get to be in Hindus and Buddhists, and we get to learning about their ancestors. And I've studied them too. You know, within the prophet, we honor all true and divine prophets: Buddha, Confucius, Abraham, Isaac. You know, I admire all that. You know, we study all those. You know what I'm saying? We understand them, all those, and put them in reference to what we're going on here in America. But we don't forget to study our own as well. But we don't forget to study our people. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that Moorish science is the only way. I'm not saying that there aren't Christians that study their history. I know there are people who will be Aboriginals and they'll be Christians and they'll be, you know, Orthodox Muslims. I understand that. I'm not saying that you can't find those philosophies, but I'm saying that it didn't become a major thing till the Prophet started doing it. Well, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, no, I was saying not to cut you off, but we are slightly kind of running out of time on this one. We definitely appreciate obviously, you know, the knowledge that you drop in. And, you know, even for myself, I've had a slight bit of familiarity with some of the teachers, more so seeing stuff from, like, you know, Brother C. Freeman Allen stuff, and, you know, a lot of others. But even from speaking to you now, it doesn't sound like how do I phrase this correctly, as stringent in the aspect of maybe some other of the Islamic sects, where it's more like, oh, it's got to be this belief and that belief, and only, you know, agreeing to one kind of ideology and stuff. Even you just say, you know, giving salute to like Buddha and Confucius and other stuff, and it just more being like looking at the scientific aspects of things. So I think that's definitely different. I know that it's quite a broad and expansive subject area, so in order for us, and even for yourself, to try and like condense it down, it's definitely difficult, and, you know, we could just be scratching the surface on stuff. So it is a shame that we are running out of time on this one. We definitely want to reconnect again though, and you know, get some more insight from you as well. So we're hoping that our viewers and listeners, if they got any thoughts or comments, they can leave them, and we can keep up this kind of respectful discourse.